I get it. I get it.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and before anyone asks, this is a fake, okay? It's a pretty cool looking fake, but no, it's called an imitation firearm under Australian law. Imitation, okay? It's plastic. And usually even imitation firearms are illegal in Australia unless you have a lawful reason to possessing one, which I do. And with that out of the way, welcome back to Underappreciated Historical Weapons, where I reveal to you some real actual, weapons that existed in history that are so cool that people don't actually realize, or when I say people, most people, there are some of you who are particularly informed that know a lot about this stuff, but to some people, they think that these weapons are just pure fantasy creations. We've already been able to have a look at the executioner sword, and in this video, we are going to be looking at gun swords. Now, the most famous gun sword that people generally familiar with is the Gunblade from Final Fantasy VIII. And kind of because of that, they just, people assume, well, it's a fictional thing, that's a fictional, video game and stuff, that they didn't really exist. But I'm here to tell you, they actually did. It's the peanut butter and jam logic. When you have something that's really, really cool, and something else that's really, really cool, what would happen if you combine them? Sometimes I love that logic. Now, the gun sword really came into being around, or it became more prominent in the 17th and 18th centuries. This is the period where the pistol started to really come into its own, alright, and became the standard sidearm for self-defense. But when pistols, in the early days when they're coming around, there was some distinct limitations about them. One of them being rate of fire. Most pistols could only get one shot before they needed to be reloaded in a fairly time-consuming manner. And so, if you're in a desperate situation where people are attacking you only have one shot, having a backup melee weapon was very, very useful. In fact, a sword. So swords were still very common in the 17th century. But you're already holding a gun in one hand, and if that is your primary hand, where you're able to perform certain articulate movements in a far more coordinated manner, you need to put your gun away and then draw your weapon. So the way to fix this problem is to have the weapon and gun combined, where you get your single shot off and then you have a weapon that you can still use to defend yourself if you don't have enough time to reload. The kind of companion element to this idea of a gun sword is, of course, a gun knife. And in fact, it seems like gun knives were even a little bit more prominent than gun swords. Knives are not as bulky, they can be just as lethal, though of course you fight differently with a knife compared to a sword, and a sword has certain advantages in keeping your opponent at bay with the reach. But pistol knives, very, very common in history, and there are actually a lot of examples. Some of the best integrations between a knife and a gun that I have seen are these designs where the blade has been kind of expertly crafted to be a single piece with the barrel itself, and gee, they look pretty awesome. Yep, for myself, if I was to pick between a knife and a sword for self-defense, I would always go with the sword. And this idea of combining a sword and a gun wasn't just around with single-shot pistols. Even when revolvers were developed, there are combinations of swords and revolvers. This image here depicts a combination French something, pinfire revolver and sword. It dates to 1800. Manufactured in Paris, France, this weapon combines a short-bladed sword with a 6-shot pepperbox revolver. The blade has a short double fuller leading to single fullers which run the rest of the length, and there are panels of etched scrollwork on each side. It's a pretty cool example, and it shows that, yeah, gun swords were even around when multiple shot pistols were developed. This does raise an interesting question though. Why didn't every gun have a knife or sword blade attached to it? I mean, for me, because it's a no-brainer. If you can add a knife and especially a sword to a gun, I'm gonna do it. But not everyone did it, and so as to why, pure speculation, okay? And my speculation is, there is a matter of practicality involved with it. Also, a gun is a far more efficient weapon than a sword, and if you had the option to put someone down with a bullet than with a blade, you would generally go with the bullet. Yet when I do look at these gun-blade combinations, there is something that comes to mind that perhaps a more proficient gun person shooting experienced them would be able to help me figure out. And it's the fact that having a blade, and especially actually a sword on the tip of a gun, well, I could really see it starting to weigh down the barrel and make aiming more difficult. And this possible detrimental feature could be increased more so with a sword. So there you go, you guys who are in America and you are legal, responsible gun owners, perhaps this is something you might be able to test. How much of an effect, or even detrimental effect, does having a blade attached to the barrel have in regards to accuracy? Because even just right now, I can test it, and holding it out like that, there's a lot more weight. I'm not going to be able to maintain this position for very long at all. It's weighing me down, and you know, double-handed, okay, I can be a bit longer, but this is a significant weight. Like this sword here, 1.1 kilos, big difference as opposed to this. So this might also actually answer the question why gun knives seem to be more common than gun swords. Maybe Scarlegrim can do the test. He strikes me as the type of guy who would be able to figure this out really well. That'll be very interesting to find out. Though, in regards to just the, example I had just shown, there does seem to be a simple enough answer which would reduce the weight issues significantly enough, but maybe not completely, which is why it's still more common to have guns with no blades attached. And it's in regards to the direction in which the blade is pointing. Now, when you look at a handgun and you think, okay, which way could I attach a blade to it? It seems logical and evident for the blade to point in the same direction as the barrel. You'll be pointing the gun at whoever you want to protect yourself against, and therefore the tip of the blade is also in that direction, so if they're running towards you, well, they'll kind of run onto the blade itself. Yet if they're going to be that close, they're, directly in striking distance to, if I was to replace what I'm holding here with a sword, well, chop chop. So I find it interesting that I've not found any examples of a gun sword in which its configuration was like so. It is so much easier to maintain this position than it was before, but I'm not saying it's completely easy. It's still significantly heavier, and I'm already starting to feel the weight pull down, so I'm thinking that there's probably still detrimental effects with a configuration like this, just not as many. And the other thing that I find interesting about this configuration is that the barrel is actually kind of standing in place of one of the quillins. And so if I was to duplicate it, having a barrel point towards you doesn't feel too secure. So maybe this double barrel quillin sword design might not be the best option, but it gives you kind of a backup. I mean, I was watching a YouTube video that was actually showing a double barrel gun, and the reason why I'm pointing this out is that it showed you could fit a double magazine into the handle of a gun. And so if you had the safety and you weren't worried about a gun pointing in your own direction, you could actually have a design where you had a double magazine in the handle, and then for the quillins, there was a barrel for each end, and when you go like bang, 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 you can just kind of flip it around, and then there's another barrel there, and you don't have to reload, and you get to go bang, bang, bang again. Now, I'm sure there's actually some of you screaming about a very obvious and clear kind of conclusion to this concept of combining knife or blade and gun, because they didn't necessarily disappear, okay? This idea has persisted even to the modern day. And it's not necessarily in permanent integration of knife or sword with gun, but as a optional fixture that you can attach to the end of rifles. Yes, I'm talking about bayonets. A bayonet does seem to be a more practical and versatile option to this kind of problem. If you run out of bullets and someone is still running at you and you need to defend yourself and you want something a bit more effective than your fists, a blade, very, very useful. And so having a blade on the end of the gun, there we go. Now, this isn't necessarily a gun sword or a gun knife, this bayonet rifle attachment. In fact, a bayoneted rifle has more in common with a spear or polearm than it does with a knife or sword. But spears and polearms are very, very deadly as well, so this isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different thing and needs to be used differently, because you fight with a sword differently than you do with a spear or polearm. Going back to the more historical examples of these blade-gun combinations, it's interesting that I haven't found too many examples of permanently fixed blades to rifles. It always seems to be bayonets, and perhaps that's because that's just more practically convenient, having something you can just attach and, take off. So if you don't think you're going to be needing this blade on the end of the gun, you can take it off, get rid of the weight, and perhaps that assists in aiming. Yet in a melee situation where you do have someone coming up against you, I do feel something more substantial than just a bayonet might be better as a permanent fixture to your gun, but it's that kind of balance between practicality and effectiveness when you actually need to use it. And more often than not, convenience and practicality does seem to win out more so above full-fledged effectiveness. Not in every situation, but that does seem to be a very significant consideration. A good example of this, generally in a medievalish scenario, the best weapons and equipment that you can kit yourself out in would be like full plate armor with a real serious polearm, halberd or poleaxe. But did people wear those things, for self-defense every single day? No, because wearing full plate armor and carrying around a big heavy polearm is very inconvenient, okay? You got a lot of other things you need to do in your casual everyday life. And so instead of using the most effective, equipment that they could wear to protect themselves in a self-defense situation, they picked the weapon that was most convenient to carry around with them, which happened to be the sword. Again, this is generally why people carry around pistols for their weapon of self-defense, then a full-on assault rifle. But when they're going into battle, you would generally pick assault rifle over pistol every single time. But you'd still have a pistol for backup, generally. And perhaps this is why the bayonet fixture to the end of a rifle is just the obvious go-to option than attaching like some serious full long blade along, on the bottom side of the barrel of the gun, like a big blade rifle swordy thing. It would be awesome, but it would be far more inconvenient to carry around. Like, how are you gonna sheath that thing? Because if you have like a big blade attached to the bottom of your rifle, can you like sheath it on the side? But then you're pulling out, and then you got the butt of the gun is a lot bigger than just the handle of the sword and stuff like that. So yeah, like bayonets, I might not be able to do big chopping motions, but I still have something, quite effective to use if I'm thrown into a melee situation and I run out of bullets in some type of fight. But there you go, this has been the historical gun sword and, gun knife that truly did exist in history. This is not a fictional creation, and my thoughts on this type of weapon as to how effective and efficient they might be, the problems associated with, and why perhaps we don't see them as often in the modern day. Because the other thing in the modern day, it's a lot easier to reload than it was in the past. Even revolvers could take a lot longer. But now, it's a simple matter of removing a magazine, replacing it with a new one, and you're good to go. So the priority in someone's mind when you run out of bullets now is just reload as quickly as possible, then, oh crap, he's still running at me, I better start trying to chop him or stab him with the blade I have on my gun. Because, like I kind of mentioned towards the beginning of this video, killing someone with a bullet is generally a lot easier and a lot more efficient and safer for you than trying to get closer and killing them with a bladed type weapon. Thank you for watching, I hope you've enjoyed. This has been a really interesting one to tackle, and of course, I hope to see you again. Until that time, farewell.